Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We did a webinar a couple of weeks ago that was part one of this series, and that was on the optional resource scheduler. And we showed how to make a reservation, both from the user standpoint, I think, and from the administrator standpoint. And today we're going to take a look at how to set up the scheduler system. And let's take care of a little bit of housekeeping first. All the phones are muted and the microphones. So questions should be asked into the chat window. We will revisit questions at the end of the demo and see if there's anything that has not already been covered in the demo. And this is particularly useful for those of you who are watching a recording. And speaking of recordings, all of our webinar recordings are on the ClubExpress Cool Stuff page. So if you go to clubexpress.com, click on Cool Stuff, then click on the Webinars tab on the left. A list of upcoming webinars is at the top of the screen, and a list of the recorded webinars is at the bottom. And just above the Webinars tab, there's a Video Tutorials tab where you can see all of the recordings of our video tutorials. All of our videos are currently housed on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, you can click on clubexpress.com and subscribe and optionally be notified. So this way you can tell when any new content shows up. And if ClubExpress is working really well for you, we'd love for you to go to clubexpress.com/reviews and click on one of these review sites so other people can have benefit of your experience using ClubExpress. So I just want to recap a couple of things that we went over last time for those of you that are not all that familiar with the resource scheduling module. This is an optional module. This allows clubs and associations to define resources that can either be reserved or rented. And lots of different types of clubs would use it. Tennis clubs let you reserve tennis courts, and you might have a clubhouse that has meeting rooms or banquet rooms, or maybe you have things that are rented by the day, like a lodge or something else that you can check out for multi-day use. For those of you that have been using the resource scheduler for a while, you'll notice that the multi-day use is a fairly new feature for us. The last webinar looked at things from the user standpoint, how they make a reservation. Today, we're going to look at it from the administrator standpoint, and we'll take a look at how to configure the system options and add resources. One of the things to take a look at is there are two tutorial videos, one for making a reservation and another for administration. The making a reservation, I think, is 17 minutes. The administration is 30 minutes. I'm going to try to get through most of what's in the administration video today, but I really urge you to watch that video because we go into all of the options, all the little minutia. It's 30 minutes, but it will save you a tremendous amount of time because you'll understand what all the options are. So to recap, resources can be rented and reserved either hourly or daily. If it's hourly, it can be in 15, 30, or 60-minute increments. If it's daily, it could be either for an entire day or overnight, meaning multi-days. And that would be appropriate for a hotel room or a ski lodge room. Keep in mind that resources are put into categories, and within categories, each individual resource can have its own properties. They don't have to follow that which is in the category. So each resource can have different properties and rental rules. The club can define a setup period before the reservation and after the reservation, say for a cleanup period. So if you're renting a meeting room, perhaps you want to set it up so that there is a half hour before the reservation and a half hour after the reservation when the room simply cannot be reserved because you need your team to come in and set it up or clean it up. And although you can set up typical fees and availability, you can actually specify different fees for different days of the week, and you can have different fees for members and non-members. And you can also have blocks of time where a particular resource simply isn't available. Something like a grass tennis court, which may be available on the weekend, but maybe you need it to not be available on Monday so the grass has a chance to regenerate. And the reason I'm mentioning all these things is we're going to take a look at how you set these things up. And so at least you'll know where we're going with it. Now, reservations operate using a shopping cart metaphor. So the member or non-member who's trying to reserve things goes into, in effect, a reservation cart. It's kind of like ordering something online and you're saying, here are the items that I'm ordering. And then they go into a checkout process. And we'll take a look at a member who has a couple of things in her cart right now, and we'll use that to demo a few things. And if you haven't already acquired the resource scheduler, This is say a $500 one-time fee to activate this module. It is on your control panel, but it's in test mode. And in this particular demo, this club is in test mode. And we can do virtually everything that you need to be able to do, except you can't actually create transactions. So there will be no charges actually incurred. If you do want to set this up for your site, just contact ClubExpress and they can activate it for your site. So we're going to do a couple of things, and it's going to be a pretty fast-paced demo, I think. We'll take a look at the resource scheduler itself, what members and non-members would see. We'll look at the resource page description, the cancellation policy. We'll look at groups of resources, which are categories. We'll look at some of the details, and we can look at a couple of reservations. And again, the reason I'm showing you these things up front is so that when we configure these things or look at the way they have been configured, you'll have a context for it. Then we're going to go into the Reservation Manager. We'll view some reservations, and you can view it either by reservation or by item. We'll take a look at approving reservations because some items may need approval. We will look at some of the maintenance icons. In addition to learning how to approve a reservation, let's learn how to decline a reservation. And we can show some of the icons for sending emails. And we'll try to add a reservation on behalf of somebody else and make it a recurring reservation, which is something only administrators can do. And we'll mark an item as unavailable for a particular date. Then we'll look at the resource manager, the items themselves, and we will look at what the current resource items are, whether they're available or decommissions are not available. We'll look at the maintenance icons, and then we'll do one of the main things that you need to do, and that's configure categories. And these set up the defaults for items. So when you set up a category for meeting rooms, it's going to be anything you put into the meeting room category will take those properties unless you override them. And we'll talk about the differences between hourly, daily, multi-day. And we'll look at category description, user agreement, and daily options. We'll look at general options, main page HTML, cancellation policy, and then we'll look at adding or editing a resource. So let's look at this one here. I'm logged in as Jenny Cho, and Jenny has reservations sitting in her cart. So she's got a reservation that she hasn't completed yet. She's reserved a pavilion for a couple of hours, and she's reserved a tennis court for a couple of hours. And so I'm just going to reserve one more thing here. And let's say she wants to take a piece of equipment on that Sunday, and she just wants this thing called a barometer logger. And we'll just say that she's going to test it. You'll notice that there's a user agreement here. And it turns out that this piece of equipment requires approval. And I'm just going to say, save and add another. So now that's sitting in her reservation cart. And the reason I want to not complete this reservation is when I jump over to the administrator side of things, we'll take a look at the reservations. And we'll see that this is still in her cart. Things only remain in her cart for up to 30 minutes from the last time she added something to the cart. So I wanted to do that just before we look at the other side. So now if I go to the Northwest Balloon Club and a different browser, and I'm logged in as Martin Smith, who is an administrator. Now we've placed the resource scheduler on the members menu. And so when we look at this, we'll see a couple of things. This here is the main page HTML. So you can put anything you want in here, and we'll show you how you configure that. Each one of these groups, balloons, equipment, pavilions, cabins, and such, these are the categories. And each category can have a description. And within each category, if we look, say, at pavilions, I can view that, and it will show each one of the items, each one of the resource items in that category, and each one of those has a description. So these are the kinds of things that we are going to be looking at how to set this up. Similarly, there's a cancellation policy here. So if I click on cancellation policy, this text here is something that we'll set up, or we'll look at the way it's been set up. And now, if Martin wanted to reserve something, we can click on reserve. And so it's going to list all the different categories. If we look at equipment, and if I move to, say, Saturday, you'll see that Jenny has reserved the barometer, and Manny has also reserved the barometer later in the day. On the next day, Jenny, the one that we just added that barometer test, she also wants to test it on the next day. If we look at cabins at the lodge is done on a daily basis, so we don't get a time of the day. So if we scroll down here, we'll see that Jenny has reserved this particular cabin, the cabin called Pine, for 3 nights. And Ben has reserved it for 2 nights. And Manny has reserved it for 2 nights. And here it's just marked as unavailable. And that's when Martin went in just beforehand and said, okay, we have to do some repairs on this thing. So we're not going to make that available. And I see, if we look at tennis courts, and we look at tennis courts for Friday, you'll see that Jenny has reserved it for practice on Friday for a couple of hours, and then on Saturday for a game. So those are the reservations that have either already been made or are in work, because a couple of these things are still sitting in Jenny's cart. So there's a couple of ways to get to the administration. You can click on Control Panel, and on the Club tab, you've got the resource scheduler here. If I go back, anytime I'm looking at the resource scheduler or the scheduling calendar, I can come over here if I'm an administrator or coordinator and click on Edit. And we get either the Resource Manager page or the Reservation Manager page. So one is managing the resources, the items themselves, and one is managing the reservations of those resources. And the reservation page can be looked at either by the reservation or by the items being reserved. And we'll come back to this in a moment. On the Resource Manager page, which is the default when you log into this, we can configure that. And if we configure in options, we can say, what is the main administration page? So we could change that between the Resource Manager or the Reservation Manager, depending on the one that you typically want to use. So we'll leave it at Resource Manager at the moment. And you can set up things like a contact person and whether or not you should show emails. If people reserve things, do you want to put them into a mailing list category? And what is the financial account? So that's a typical thing that you would want to configure. Let's just take care of a couple of options first. The main page HTML is simply that HTML that shows at the top of the reservation page. And this can be as complicated as you want, and it can have pictures and links and all of that stuff. But it's just basic advanced content editor. We can also configure the cancellation policy. So here's, again, the advanced content editor where you can list what your cancellation policy is. So that's just some of the things that you would do from the administration screen. And you'll notice that if I click on Reservation Manager, these same items appear on both admin screens. So they're both administration screens, but you'll get a couple of different items depending on which one you're looking at. Like on this one here is that let you add a resource. If you click on reservation, you can add a reservation. So let's just take a look at the reservations first. In reservations, you can either look at it by reservations or by items. So if it's by reservations, you can think of this like an invoice. I placed an order, and here are the items I ordered. So in that case, this date here, this start date is the start date of the invoice, not of the items that are in the invoice, not of when the items are going to be delivered or when the items are going to be reserved for. It's, okay, show me all of the reservations that have been made as of this date or later. So if I click on search, we'll see a couple of things. And you'll see here that it's showing a few things here. A couple are waiting for approval, a couple are final, but I'm now going to check in cart. In fact, let me see all of those. And if I search now, we'll see the one for Jenny that hasn't been placed yet. It's still in her cart. and I can look at what's in the cart, and I can do a couple of things, and we'll get back to this in a moment. I'm just going to go over to Jenny for a moment, and I'm going to complete the reservation. And she says, your reservation request has been saved. You'll be notified when it is approved, because we have one item in there that needs approval. And so if I come back to the Reservation Manager and I refresh the page, this in cart should change to say that it's waiting for approval. So again, these are, in effect, the invoice. Here are the things that the order date was today, and I could go back and change it, say, to a few days earlier, and a lot of these were reserved a couple of weeks ago when I was working on the tutorial. So let's just work on today's date. You can pick a particular date, but these are, in effect, the date of the invoice, not the date that these things are going to be reserved for. So for any one of these, I can find out who it is. It's Jenny Cho. She's a member. It could be a non-member. It's showing that this is waiting for approval. It shows there are 4 items. And I can actually look at the cart, the reservation details. So here are the 4 items. We have the option to cancel or keep. Interesting, this one here should have had a decline. For example, this one here, I should be able to reject it. I don't know, we couldn't reject the other one. And Ben Richards has one, and Manny has one. And so these are the actual reservations. Some reservations need to be approved. So if I come over here and I want to approve reservations, this is only for approvals. So what I can do is I can say approve this one here and this one here and not approve this one for Jenny. So those items that were marked as waiting for approval, 2 of them will now say that they're final. So I can just approve checked items. I could also click up here to check everything. So let's approve those checked items. And now when we come back, you'll see that the only one that's waiting for approval is this Jenny. And what I want to do is I want to reject her barometer because she had probably inadvertently reserved it twice. So I'm going to reject this and say can't reserve twice in a month. So this will be sent to her as the reason why that particular item was rejected. If I wanted to cancel something, I could cancel it, but this something needed approval. So now when I click save, it shows that payment is pending. Now, in this particular club, this is kind of an odd thing that this payment pending shouldn't show up, but it only happens after approval, and we'll get that worked out. But normally, once something has been approved, payment would be pending. And so this is the normal behavior, but it shouldn't be happening right now because we're in test mode. But these are the kinds of things that you would do for a reservation. Now, if we look at the items in the reservation, now the start date is not the date of the invoice, but it is the date that the item was reserved for. And so here you can decide whether or not you want to see hourly or daily or both, whether or not they are approved or waiting for approval. And just like the last one, you could search for a particular username and the reservation number. So if I search here, now we get a bunch of things that are coming up. And we're seeing that this tennis court is reserved on a particular date from this time. The barometer is here. There are some conference rooms that were here that were set up from the video tutorials. So these were actually reserved a couple of weeks ago. And so you get to see all of the things. You get to see their reference number and their position within the reference number. So this was reference number 1238.1. This one was 1238.4. These 1238.3 is here. So you get to see all of the items that were there. And here is 1238.2. So there were 4 items in her reservation. And this is listed by the date that the item has been reserved for. Again, that's different than the other screen where it was the date of the reservation was made. And again, here, if you needed to, you could cancel it and such. So that's the reservation side of it. There are reservations reports, daily reservations by resource or category, and your typical complement of reports. And we won't use the check-in desk here. I suppose we could use check-in desk from here. This is for the reservation date. And you can go back and use different dates, but let's look in for Saturday the 16th. If I search here, you'll see that we have the people who have items that have been reserved for that date. And what you could do is you can check people in or check them out. And so when somebody comes to pick up an item, you might want to just flag that, yes, it's been picked up. Or they rented a balloon, or they checked into their hotel room. And the way you do this is just by clicking your mouse over where it's not checked in. And you'll notice that we're saying show the pending open items only. So if I click on that, she disappears. But if I took off check pending items only, we can come over here to show that she was checked in. And if I wanted to check her out, say, oh, I checked in the wrong person, I can just click on it again. And I want to bring her back to checked out status. So that's the reservation side of things. And I know I'm going pretty quick, but right now we got a lot to cover. Samantha, are there any questions about the reservation manager at this point?
None so far.
Okay, we're just barreling right ahead here. Okay, so if I'm on the reservation manager, we've already looked at it by items, and we looked at it by reservation. Oh, by the way, on the reservations, before I forget, the icons here, you can look at the reservation and you can resend confirmation emails. And there are two different kinds of confirmation emails. One is to confirm to the person who made the reservation that they've made a reservation. And if the person who made the reservation is allowed to make notifications, say Jenny reserved a tennis court and she wanted to notify another couple that she'd reserved it for a foursome, or that you're staying in a cabin and with another couples or your kids or whatever, you need to notify them. It can be set up so that you allow notifications. If the administrator clicks on this, both kinds of notifications would be sent, the confirmation and any of the emails that normally would have been sent when the reservation was complete and paid for. So now let's go back to the resource manager. And the resource manager, when we click on this, shows all of the items that are in each category. So this is sorted alphabetically by category and then by the item name within category. And we have things like, if we look down at courts, we've got a couple of different tennis courts that are available. We've got some trailers available. We have pavilions, meeting rooms, equipment, cabins at the campground, and cabins at the lodge. And these are all available because I've got it filtered up here as available. I can also make things that are typically just not available, a particular category not available, or categories can be totally decommissioned. And so if I search then, all of a sudden you'll see we have 69 items, a whole bunch of things that are either just not being used anymore or are just not currently available. So let's take a look. I'll go back to only those things that are available because these are the only things that will appear on the reservation screen when people are looking at the available categories or looking, say, if we look over here, only those categories and items within those categories will be available. So the category itself can be available or not available, and the items within the categories will be available. So for any one of these things, if we were to look, say, at the barometer logger, it shows the name of the item, the short name. The short name appears at the top of the scheduling calendar because we've got these vertical columns for the names of equipment or the names of the meeting rooms or the names of the tennis courts, or the names of the cabins. And you say, this is an item in the equipment category. Then we have all these optional fields. If you don't specify anything in particular in the options, it's going to inherit from the category. And we'll get to the category in a moment. So this is the equipment category. And you'll see here that everything here is using the category settings, using the category settings, using category settings. Everything here is using the category settings, except that it's not using here the category settings for schedule. So if I said use category settings, it would just use whatever is in the category settings. But if I say no, it may be that I've got different defaults for the length of the reservation unit, things like that. There are sections for fees and time, sections for resource usage. So pretty much all of these things allow for you just to say, I want it to just be treated like any other piece of equipment. The thing that is different, however, is that for this item, here's where you can add a photo for the item. There is no photo for a category. So you would come in here and say, okay, I want to use all the equipment category properties, but I want to have a picture of this particular item. Similarly, for each one of these, you can have a description for that item. So if we look at the Eagle cabin, it's saying this one sleeps 4, has a small refrigerator and a microwave oven. The Falcon one just says sleeps 6 and has a full kitchen. So here's where you put the description that will go next to the picture when we're looking at the details. The user agreement, if we look, say, the user agreement for the barometer logger is for this particular item. So here we say, okay, when you reserve the barometer, you have to agree that it's powered by batteries. The batteries are not included. You have to provide your own batteries and confirm that the device is functioning properly. And the unit has to be returned without batteries. And if you lose or damage it, you're going to pay for repair. So that's what's going to show up. And that's what did show up when she reserved the barometer logger. And I just checked through that user agreement. So you can set that up for anything. These are the user agreements for this particular item. And then you've got customized daily items where you can say, for this particular item, I want to use its category settings, or I want to say this particular item has a higher fee on Sunday, or is only available for particular times on Sunday. Maybe the president of the club has it in the morning, has just reserved it, and say, this thing's just not going to be available until later in the afternoon. Again, you can use the category settings or you can customize it. So these are the kinds of things that you can customize for each of these items. And you're customizing them, say, compared to other items in the category. So let's talk about categories. If we go into configure categories, you'll see that we have a whole bunch of categories here. Some of them aren't currently in use. For each one of the categories, it shows how many resources are currently in that category. So there were 2 balloons, there were 9 pieces of equipment, not all of which were active. And these clubhouse, these aren't being used. So if I look at some of these things like this Carolina General Purpose Room, and if I go into edit it, you'll see that it's been decommissioned. I could recommission it. I can make it flagged as unavailable, but decommissioned will simply not make it show up on the calendar. And I think unavailable shows up, but it's just, you just flagged as unavailable. The time is flagged as unavailable. So if I go back here, you can change the display sequence of the categories. This is what determines, when we look at the resource scheduler, this determines what order these categories will appear on the list. And within a category, the resource sequence says, okay, here are the 2 balloons that you've got. So if I take balloon Big Bandit and move it to the top, and now I go back to resource scheduler, And I view here, now Blue Bandit is sitting at the top. So that's where these come in. And so for any of the categories, you can edit the description, which is the description that shows at the top of the category. You can edit the user agreement so that anytime anything in the category is rented, this user agreement can appear, unless, of course, there is a user agreement for a specific item in the category, which then would supersede this one. And anything for times for the items. So you could say that, okay, balloons are simply not available on Wednesdays. And you could come over here and set custom times, and you can say that it's not available. I'm just going to cancel this. And let's just go back here, back into configure categories. So let's take a look at two different kinds of categories. Let's look at an hourly category. And if we set up a new category, it would be the same kind of thing. I don't want to add a category. Let me use pavilions. So you'll notice that we have some that are hourly and some that are daily. If I look at pavilions, you see the category name is pavilions. Its reservation type could be hourly or daily, and this is going to be hourly. And then you can decide what the reservation unit is. So this is going to be reserved by the hour, because certain things might be reserved by the quarter hour or by the half hour. And then the reservation unit is used to tell people how many the minimum or maximum reservation units are. So this particular category is available. This is available to members and admins, so the pavilions are not going to be shown if somebody's not logged in. So if you put this on your public side of your website, you could allow people to reserve, say, a cabin, but not allow them to reserve a pavilion unless they are a member who's logged in. And people that are not logged in will only see those items that they're allowed to see. And similarly, logged in people will only see that which they're allowed to see. So if you have marked something as admin only, your general members will not see that unless they're an administrator. So generally, this category does not require approval. Or you could say that everybody requires an approval, or non-members only require approval. So we'll say no approval required. And we have things like the master account, who's the contact person for this category of items. And what about reservation length? Because this is an hourly reservation, we can say that this is a fixed schedule that always uses a certain number of units. And up here, we had defined the units as an hour. If you had set it to a quarter hour, you would determine how many quarter hours the reservation length is, if everybody always rents it for the same amount of time. So this isn't an hour, this is whatever the reservation type is. So it could be in quarter hours, you could make it for a 45-minute rental, you would make it quarter hour and 3 one-quarter-hour units. Well, let's not make this a fixed schedule. We want people to be able to determine how long they want it for. So right now we're saying the default is going to be 2 units, which is 2 hours, with a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 10. And then we're saying, oh, okay, well, we need, in quarter hours, we need a half hour to prep it and a half hour to take it at the end. So what happens is that although somebody may rent it for an hour, we're going to have a half hour before and a half hour afterwards where somebody has to go check it out. But it might be, say, for a balloon rental, rather a burner or a basket or something else that's a piece of equipment, may need to get it ready for rental and to clean it up. And although these times show as not available on the calendar, they're not part of the charge. So if somebody rents it for an hour and it needs a half hour prep and a half hour cleanup, those things there are not considered part of the rental time. Now, if you allow partial units, this means that, so this is set for an hour, I'm going to let them go for an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes. They don't have to do it in complete units, although it would still be bound by the minimum. Prorate fees says, okay, if they rent for an hour and a half, do I charge them for an hour and a half, or do I charge them, hey, you're into the second hour, therefore you've reserved for 2 hours? So if they rent for an hour and a half, they'll pay the reservation fee per unit, 1.5 units. If they rent for an hour and a half, and I'm not allowing the prorate fee, that will be charged for 2 units. So here we're going to allow for partial units. We'll allow for the prep and cleanup time. And we're saying that this is $100 per unit for the pavilion for the members and $125 for non-members. So remember, we're looking at a pavilion, a place to hold parties and barbecues and things like that. And it's showing here's the time that items in this category are generally available. And you can click here to set the start and end times. Oh, I have to go back here to say 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And what's the maximum number of days in advance that you can set this thing? Then when looking at the scheduling calendar, what do you want in the scheduling calendar to show? Do you want it just to show that it's gray and it's blocked off, which would mean that the usage description is none? Or do you want to make it optional, or do you want to make it required? So I'm going to say that this is optional, and where possible, we're going to put in the name of the person who reserved it and the usage description. And then we do a couple of things here. Allow user notifications is when the user is making the reservation. At the end of the reservation, you can say, I want to notify my 3 friends here, or up to 5 other members, that I've made this reservation. And then here you set up notify contacts on reservation. And do you want to prompt for setup instructions? So in this case, you don't necessarily need to prompt, say, for a barometer, but if you want to reserve a pavilion in the reservation itself, when someone's making the reservation, there's going to be a field there for setup instructions so that you can say, oh, set this up for a birthday party, or if it was a conference room, make sure the projector screen is there, or something like that. And then you can also put in rules that display saying, hey, these are outdoor pavilions, however, they are strictly no smoking. So that's the way we've set up this category. And this, again, is an hourly category. Any one of the items in that category can have overrides. So let's take a look at something like trailers. This is daily, a trailer, but you can't do it for more than 1 day. So you'll see the reservation length here doesn't have anything here because we said that this is not used for overnight reservations. So let's do one that is used for overnight reservations. So let's do a cabin at the campground. So cabins at the campground are set for daily. It's available, allow non-members. Non-members require approval. That's different than the pavilions, which were only available to members and didn't require approval. We have the same kinds of things for the contact person. And over here, you'll see what this says, that this is resources are used for overnight reservations. If this was unclicked, then it would, somebody reserves it, would only reserve a particular day, and it doesn't give them the option of how many days I want to reserve it for. So in this case, we'll say, okay, it's for overnight reservations. And we could say, you can only reserve for 1 night, or you can only reserve for 3 nights. But here we'll say it can be of varying units. How many units? And remember, this is daily unit. Default 1 day. We can say minimum of a day, a maximum of, say, 10 days. And that's for the category. Remember, these are all defaults for items in the category. And then you say, okay, the reservation fee for members and for non-members. And then you can say, here's the time that it's available. Now, for something like this, let's think about what a typical overnight reservation is. If you check into a hotel room, you might have check-in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and check out at 11 o'clock in the morning because you need time for the cleaning crews to prepare the room for the next reservation. So here it says that it's available from 3 p.m. to 11 a.m. the next day, or in this case, on the last day of the reservation. And then we've got the same options here for the reservation, the resource usage description and such. So let's just cancel this. So those are the categories. And again, the categories are setting up defaults. As an administrator, I'm going to go back to the resource manager, and I could add a resource, and it will ask me what's the resource. And we ask to say this is a new piece of equipment. And well, let's just do it really quick. And we'll call this an altimeter. And we're saying it's a piece of equipment. And then I can go into the optional fields here. And if I don't select anything, it will just take from the category. If I come over here, I can say use category setting, which is the default. So I'm going to leave all this stuff out. But I'm going to say that the reservation fee here is $35 for members and $40 for non-members. And I can say that this is only available from 7 o'clock in the morning until 11 a.m. And I can use everything else. I can use the category settings, and I can go and browse for a picture of the item. If I save it and I go into the resource scheduler, here it is in the scheduler. You'll see that it is now available, and you see that it's not available in the afternoons. And let's just see if it shows up in equipment. There it is, the altimeter. So we would put in the description and we would put in a picture. So that's the way you would add a resource. And more often than not, it's going to have the properties of the category that it's in. But again, for each one of these items, you can reconfigure it for anything you want. If I go to the Reservation Manager, there's two things that are important here. One is I can add a reservation. And let's assume that I'm looking at something that is a daily reservation, something like cabins at the lodge. I can come over here. You see how this is unavailable? I can come over here and say on Friday, I'm going to say for 2 nights, I'm going to mark this as unavailable because I know that we need to do repairs on that room. So I click on this and I say mark as unavailable. And now if I look at, was that cabins at the lodge or cabins at the campground? Oh, here it is, cabins at the lodge. Now you'll see that it's marked as unavailable. So that's something I can do as an administrator. The other thing that I can do as an administrator, if I go to a reservation, is I can add a reservation. And let's assume that I want this to be a meeting room. And I want, unlike a user, I want to set this thing up so that this meets every Monday for the next few weeks at 9 o'clock. So I would click on this and I would say that I want this from 9 o'clock in the morning until, say, 11 o'clock in the morning. I need a quarter hour of prep time and a quarter hour of cleanup time. And we're going to say this is for the ground crew training meetings. Say we need a projector. This could be associated with an event. But more importantly here, I'm going to say we want to copy this reservation. Now, your users, when they make a reservation, would not see this copy this reservation. So if I say copy the reservation, this button will change. So I'm going to click on copy. And now I can either make one copy or I can make multiple copies. So I'm going to say make multiple copies. And I want this, what date did I make this on? This was on Wednesday. Let's make it every Wednesday for the next 6 weeks. So, I mean, we could make it so that making multiple copies on either on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. It's the same as what you can do with events. So let's make this on a weekly basis every week on Wednesday for the next 6 Wednesdays. And when I choose that, it shows the items. So these are individual reservation items. If there was a conflict where there was a room that was already booked for that date, you'd see a red X here. But these will all go through. If there's an X, it'll simply make all the reservations it can, but it's telling you that, hey, there's some that we can't make. And if I save and check out, we can put in a title for the reservation. It's showing that these are all the items that have been reserved. If I check out, it's going to say, okay, who am I making this reservation for? Am I making it for myself as Martin Smith? Am I making it from another member? So let's say if I make this for AB and make it for Audrey, and we do select, and I complete the reservation, Audrey would be notified as if she had made it. Or it could be making it for a non-member, at which case it's going to ask me for the information about the non-member. If I complete the reservation, it's been saved. If I go back to the edit screen and go to the Reservation Manager and look at the reservations for today, you'll see that Audrey Abante is here. It's showing all of the items for the days that we had reserved it, and the fees and the total and all of that. So that is reservation scheduling and how to administer the items. So do we have any questions, Samantha?
Really, the only questions we had a couple of questions about overnight reservations and, can you create an overnight reservation where there's like a week minimum reservation and it would just be a matter of making the minimum units for the item 7 as opposed to just 1 or 2?
That's correct. So if you had something like this one here, the Eagle cabin, you could come over here and would simply say the minimum here, instead of being 2, would be 7. You can make the maximum 7. You can make the default 7. So you would set that up. And so that's a pretty straightforward thing to do.
And that's all we had.
All right. So I don't know how many people are actually using the resource scheduler. Some people may want to take another look at the resource scheduler, especially now that we have the overnight reservations. That's a fairly recent addition to the module. And so for some organizations that had items that they needed to be reserved overnight or for multiple days, they may have said, well, this wasn't suitable to our purpose. Well, maybe now it is. So I suggest if you're interested in the Resource Manager, look at the tutorials. And if you go to the control panel and you go to support and you go to tutorials, and this would be on the Club tab, you'll see that we have these 2 videos, one for Resource Scheduler from the user side called Making a Reservation, and one for Resource Schedule Administration, which goes through the things that I went through today, but in greater detail. It's about a half-hour video, and this will show you all the options that are available with the Resource Scheduler. So I thank everybody for coming, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.